I have been called many things in Varanmore: the Warden King, the Storm's Edge, the man who holds the high passes so that the valleys below may sleep without fear. My generals call me Iron. My pack calls me tireless. My council calls me, in their careful way, difficult to love. They are not wrong about any of it. I have held this kingdom by its teeth for 11 years, since my father's body came down from the Thornwall Ridge on a pine-bough litter, and the crown went onto my head before the blood had dried on the stones. I learned to rule the way the mountain teaches everything, by surviving what it throws at you, by standing in the wind until you understand which direction it wants to go, and then holding your ground anyway. I have not lost a pass. I have not lost a soldier I could save. I have not broken a single oath I made at my father's funeral fire. What I had never managed, what 11 years of iron governance had not produced, was a mate. Not for lack of candidates. My council had paraded women before me the way you parade horses at a market. This one's bloodline, this one's territory, this one's alliance value. I had listened to every presentation with the same expression I use for supply reports, which is to say, the expression of a man who is taking in information and has already decided it does not solve his problem. They were fine women, all of them. None of them were mine. My wolf knew it before I admitted it to myself. Greyhorn bonded to me since the winter I turned 17, a wolf the size of a small pony, slate gray and scarred along his left flank from the ambush at Coldwater Ford, had never once responded to any woman my counsel suggested. He would sit at my side during these presentations with the patient boredom of a guard dog at a feast, ears flat, yellow eyes tracking the nearest exit. He was, in this as in most things, a better judge of character than I was. What I did not know, what neither of us knew, because the bond does not announce itself in advance, was that it had already found her. It had been pulling at the edges of my chest for 2 years like a current under ice, a directional ache I had attributed to overwork and not enough sleep. Northwest, always northwest, toward the high ridges where the mountain drops its worst weather, and only the most stubborn people choose to live. I should have listened sooner, but I am, as my counsel notes, difficult. The storm that came in off the Thornwall on the 14th of the frost month was the worst in 7 years. I know this because I was in it. I had taken a small patrol up the Northwest Passes 3 days prior to investigate reports of unauthorized crossing near the Varanmore border markers. Not an army, not an invasion, but the kind of quiet organized movement that precedes one if you let it go unanswered. My patrol had handled the situation. We were on our way back down when the sky closed like a fist. I have been in mountain storms before. I am not easy to frighten. But this one came with a fury that was almost personal, a horizontal wall of ice wind that dropped visibility to the length of your arm and made the ridge paths into death traps. I ordered my men to shelter in the Thornwall Way Station, a stone building cut into the rock face at the pass's lower end, stocked for exactly this kind of emergency. Greyhorn did not follow. I turned at the way station door and he was not behind me. My Lieutenant Davin called his name into the wind. Nothing. I felt the bond between us, the constant low hum of a bonded wolf's presence at the back of my mind, and it was there, but far, and pulling northwest with an urgency that made the hum feel more like a shout. Stay, I told Davin, and I went back into the storm. It was perhaps the least rational decision of my adult life. I am aware of that. A king does not leave his patrol's shelter to follow a wolf into a killing whiteout on a mountain pass. A sensible man would have waited until the storm broke and sent scouts at first light. I am difficult, as I have established, and Greyhorn is not just any wolf. I followed the bond northwest along the ridge for what felt like an hour and was probably 20 minutes. Time moves differently when the wind is trying to pull you off the rock face. The bond was pulling hard, not with the frantic pitch of injury, but with something else, something I couldn't name, a quality I had never felt from it before. It was less like distress and more like here. Come here. This matters. The lean-to appeared in a gap between 2 granite outcrops, nearly invisible in the whiteout, a low stone structure built against the cliff face with a slanted roof of pine poles weighted with flat rocks, the kind of shelter a person builds over years rather than in an afternoon. Smoke came from a gap at the peak. Light showed at the edge of a skins-covered door. I stopped at the edge of the shelter's wind shadow and listened. A woman's voice, low and even, talking the way you talk to a frightened animal. Not crooning, nothing soft or performative about it, just the steady rhythm of someone who has done this before and is concentrating. Easy. I know it hurts. You're safe, the bleeding stopped, just keep still for me. I need to pack the wound before the cold gets into it. I moved around the outcrop and looked through the gap in the door skins. Greyhorn was inside. He lay on his side on a packed earth floor covered with pine boughs, his left foreleg extended. A gash ran from his shoulder down toward his elbow. I hadn't seen it when he'd been with the patrol, which meant he'd taken it after he left us, which meant he had not merely wandered away but had been moving toward this shelter with a purpose I was only beginning to understand. He was enormous, even lying down, and he filled half the lean-to. The woman working over him filled the other half, barely. She was kneeling at his shoulder, both hands inside the wound packing something, moss, I realized, or a particular preparation of it, with the efficient, economical movements of someone who has treated injuries in the dark before and doesn't need good light to know what she's doing. A tallow candle burned on a stone ledge behind her. The lean-to was warm, barely. A small fire in a stone ring near the door, more smoke than flame, but enough. She was not afraid of him. This was the first thing I registered, because Greyhorn is not a wolf that people approach without fear. He is the Alpha King's bonded wolf. He is the size of a calf. He has scars that tell their own stories. He had been brought into the holds twice in his life, and both times the stable staff had to be replaced, because the first group refused to return. He was lying with his head turned toward this woman, and his tail was flat on the ground, not in submission, not in fear, just in the specific stillness of an animal that is in pain and has decided, against all its usual judgment, to hold still because someone is helping. There, she said quietly, almost don't move yet. She had no pack mark that I could see. She was dressed in layers of undyed wool and heavy linen, practical and worn, the clothes of someone who works outdoors in cold weather and doesn't think much about how they look doing it. Her hair was dark and pinned back roughly. Her hands were capable, herbalist's hands, stained at the fingertips, sure in their work. I stood in the wind and watched her save my wolf's life. She worked for another half-hour, cleaning the wound, packing it, binding it with strips of cloth that had been soaking in something aromatic and antiseptic over the fire. She talked to Greyhorn the whole time, not in the voices people use to show that they're kind, in the matter-of-fact voice of someone who talks to wolves the way other people talk to difficult equipment, acknowledging that the situation is complicated and proceeding anyway. She told him he had made a terrible decision coming up onto the ridge in this weather. She told him the packing would hold if he didn't tear it by moving too fast. She told him she had a spare blanket that was probably not large enough for him, but she'd make it work. Greyhorn's tail moved once, just once, a single slow sweep across the pine boughs. I had owned that wolf for 14 years. I had never seen him wag his tail. I was still standing in the storm, which had not diminished, trying to understand what I was looking at. The bond in my chest had stopped pulling. It had arrived. It was sitting quietly, for the first time in 2 years, with the settled certainty of something that has reached the place it was always going. I did not go inside. Not yet. I told myself this was tactical. I didn't want to startle her in a confined space with an injured wolf. I didn't want to alarm her. I wanted to assess the situation. All of these things were true, and none of them were the real reason. The real reason was that something was happening in my chest that I did not have the vocabulary for, and I needed a moment to locate my footing before I stepped into the light. She had finished bandaging and was sitting back on her heels, looking at Greyhorn with an expression I could only partially read, relief, mostly, and the particular tiredness of someone who has just worked hard at something that mattered. She reached out and laid her hand flat on his shoulder, not petting, just resting there. "You'll do," she told him. "You're tough. Whoever keeps you should know how lucky they are." The bond in my chest made a sound like a bell struck once, very clean, and then was quiet. The storm shifted. I had known this kind of shift before, the moment when a bad storm decides it isn't finished and reaches for its worst. The wind changed direction and speed in the same instant, and the Linta shuddered. Something on the ridge above us, a snow shelf, a section of ice that had been accumulating for weeks, let go with a sound like the mountain clearing its throat. Rockfall, ice and stone, coming down the cliff face above the lean-to. I was moving before I had decided to move toward the shelter, not away from it, because Greyhorn was inside and couldn't run and the woman was inside with him. But she moved first. She threw herself over the wolf. Not away from him, over him. She put her body between Greyhorn and the cliffside wall of the lean-to, both arms spread across his shoulder and neck, her face pressed against his fur, and she held there while the rockfall hit the roof. The lean-to held. It was old and well-built, and the stone absorbed the impact, but the front edge of the roof buckled and the door frame cracked, and a section of the upper wall above the door shifted. She didn't move. Not when the first impact hit. Not when the second, smaller cascade of ice followed. She lay across my wolf and covered him with her own body and did not move until the mountain was quiet again. The silence after a rockfall is its own kind of sound. Then she lifted her head, checked Greyhorn. He was shaken, but the bandaging had held. Nothing new, and let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something she was choosing not to call fear. "Right," she said to no one in particular. "Right, we're all right." And then the mark ignited. I have spoken to men who have found their fated mate. I have heard the descriptions, a warmth, a recognition, a sense of something clicking into place. These descriptions are inadequate. What happened across my left shoulder when she pressed herself over Greyhorn to shield him was not warmth. It was silver fire. It was a line drawn in burning iron from my shoulder down my spine, every nerve I had lighting at once with a clarity that was almost violent, the knowledge arriving not like an idea, but like a fact I had always known and simply been prevented from accessing until this exact moment. I made a sound I have never made in my adult life, something between a sharp breath and something worse. And she heard it. She came upright, turning toward the door, and I was standing in the broken frame of it, one hand braced against the cracked stone, in the full light of her tallow candle, in no position to explain myself. We looked at each other. Greyhorn lifted his head and looked at both of us with the expression of a wolf who has been waiting for this particular moment for quite some time and finds it satisfying. "You're real," she said. It wasn't a question. It was the tone of a person recalibrating quickly because they are practical, and this is what the situation requires. "I'm real," I said. My voice came out steadier than I deserved, given what was happening across my shoulder. "That's my wolf." "I know," she said. "He found his way to me." There was a pause in which the storm continued its business outside, and neither of us said anything. I was looking at her the way you look at something you have been trying to find for years without knowing you were looking, with a recognition so complete that it bypasses the mind and lands somewhere further in. The bond was burning in my chest with the slow, steady heat of a forge fire, certain of itself, in no hurry. "You covered him," I said. "He couldn't run," she said simply. That was all she said about it. As if throwing herself over a wolf the size of a calf to shield him from a rockfall in a killing storm was a thing that simply followed from the situation, the way you step over a threshold when it's raining rather than standing in the rain, as if the question of cost had not entered her thinking. My wolf, my chest, the burning mark across my shoulder, everything was in agreement about what she was. I was considerably less steady than any of them. "Come inside," she said, because the wind was still coming through the broken door frame and I was letting the cold in. "There's space if you don't mind the floor." I came inside. Her name was Lyra. She told me this in the same direct way she told me everything else, not offering more than the question asked. Lyra. She lived on the border ridge, had for 6 years, since she'd come up from the lower Pack territories and decided she preferred the mountain. She gathered and prepared medicinal herbs. The ridge had plants that didn't grow below the snowline, things she'd spent years learning to work with. She sold preparations down in the valley settlements when she went for supplies twice a year. She had no Pack affiliation, no rank marker, no bond mark until 20 minutes ago, though she hadn't looked at her shoulder yet. She didn't know what the mark was. I realized this as I watched her move around the lean-to. She was rubbing at her shoulder absently, as if it itched or ached, not with the alarm of someone who knew what they were looking at. She'd grown up outside the Pack system in some meaningful way, or in a part of it where the marklore wasn't well taught. She knew wolves. She didn't necessarily know this. I was going to have to tell her. "Lyra," I said. She looked up from where she was banking the fire. "Look at your shoulder." She looked at me steadily for a moment, then pushed back the wool at her neckline and looked down. The mark was silver on her skin, precise and bright, the specific knotwork that means a faded bond in every Pack system in the mountain range, unmistakable if you knew what you were looking at. She was quiet for a moment. "What is that?" she said. Not a question exactly. More like a woman deciding how much information she wants before she has to respond to it. "It's a mate mark," I said. "A faded bond. It ignites when a bonded pair encounters each other at the right moment. A moment of—" I considered the clinical explanation and discarded it. "A moment like the one we just had." "I threw myself over a wolf," she said. "You threw yourself over my wolf," I said, "to protect him, at considerable risk to yourself." The roof held. "You didn't know it would." She looked at the mark again. She was not, I noted, afraid. She was thinking. There is a difference and it matters. "You're the Alpha King," she said. She said it the way you say a fact you've just located in memory. Not with awe, not with fear, simply with the tone of someone establishing the relevant coordinates. "Kale," I said, "Warden King of Varanmore. And this mark means—" "That you are my fated mate," I said. "That the bond between us is real and recognized by the power that governs these things. That Greyhorn came to you tonight because he knew, and I followed because he led me here, and what happened in the last hour was not coincidence." The storm was quieter. I could hear the fire and Greyhorn's breathing, and the specific silence of a moment that is waiting to see what happens next. "I don't belong to a Pack," she said. "I know. I have no rank, no territory, no blood claim to anything in Varanmore's system. I know. You're the king of the mountain range." "Yes." She looked at me with an expression I would spend the next several months learning to read in all its variations, but which on this first night I could only identify as, "I am taking this seriously, and I have not yet decided what to do with it, and I am going to be honest with you about that fact." "This is a great deal of information," she said, "for the middle of a rockfall." "It is," I agreed. "I apologize for the timing." Something shifted in her face, not a smile, not quite, but its precursor. "Can we at least wait until the storm stops?" "We can wait," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." I meant it in the immediate sense, but we both heard it in the other sense too, and she looked at the mark on her shoulder one more time and then looked at me, and did not tell me to leave. We stayed in the lean-to through the rest of the storm. It is a strange thing, spending a night in a confined space with the person who is, according to every law of Pack and bond and mountain, yours, when neither of you has had any preparation for the other, and the world outside is still throwing ice at the walls. We did not speak the way people speak when they are trying to make an impression. We spoke the way people speak when they are cold and tired and have just been through something difficult together, which is to say, honestly and without decoration. She told me about the ridge. 6 years of it, the plants, the weather patterns, the wolves that occasionally drifted up from the lower territories and sometimes stayed. She had no sense that this was interesting to me because of anything other than genuine curiosity, which was correct. She was precise in the way of someone who has taught herself things through observation and experiment, and doesn't pad the account with speculation. She knew the high passes better than anyone in my patrol. She knew where the ice shelves built and where they broke and in which order, which was information my surveyors had been trying to establish for 3 years. I told her about the Thornwall border problem. I don't know why. It's not the kind of thing I discuss with people I've known for 2 hours in Alinta during a storm. But she had asked, in her direct way, what I'd been doing on the ridge in this weather, and I told her the truth. And then she asked questions that were sharper than the ones my generals had asked. And we were discussing border security methodology at 3 in the morning while Greyhorn slept between us, and the storm slowly released its grip on the mountain. She fell asleep before I did, her back against the stone wall, her head tilted at the angle of someone who has learned to sleep in uncomfortable places. I sat with the fire and Greyhorn, and the burning quiet of the mark across my shoulder, and understood, with a clarity that had nothing to do with thought, that the directional ache I'd been carrying for 2 years had not been overwork. It had been this. It had always been this. At some point before dawn, the storm finished and the wind stilled, and the mountain returned to its usual cold silence. I went outside and looked at the ridge in the new stillness, ice-glazed granite, the sky beginning to lighten at the Thornwall's eastern edge, the passes below still buried in last night's drift. The world had the scoured look it gets after a bad storm, everything stripped down to its essential shape. I went back inside. Lyra was awake, sitting up, her hands wrapped around a clay cup of something she'd heated at the rebuilt fire. She had checked Greyhorn's bandaging. She told me the packing had held and the wound wasn't heating, which was good. He'd need to take the descent slowly, but he'd manage. She told me this the way she told me everything, as information she'd gathered and was passing along, with no particular view on what I ought to feel about it. "How long has he been bonded to you?" she asked. 14 years. "He's a good wolf," she said. "Steady. He trusts you, which means he knows something about you." "What does he know?" She thought about it. "That you're worth trusting," she said. I sat across the fire from her in the light that was finally coming through the gap where the door skins had torn, and I looked at her and thought, here is the problem. The problem is not that she is unimpressive. The problem is the opposite. She is sitting in a lean-to on the edge of a mountain after a rockfall with none of the things that my council says a king's mate should have: no rank, no bloodline, no territorial claim, and she has more command of this specific situation than anyone I've spoken to in 2 years. And she covered my wolf with her body without counting the cost, and the mark on her shoulder is the clearest thing I have ever seen. My council is going to have opinions. My pack is going to have opinions. The politics of a Warden King taking a mateless border dweller with no pack standing as his fated mate are going to be considerable, and people are going to feel strongly about them. I am, as I have noted, difficult. I have held mountain passes in the worst weather this range produces. I have governed this kingdom by its teeth for 11 years. I am not especially concerned about my council's opinions. "I want to be honest with you," I said. She looked at me steadily. "I'd prefer it. The mark is real. The bond is real. I am not in the practice of explaining myself to other people, but I want you to understand that this is not something I do lightly. Varanmore's mate bond law is clear. A fated bond is recognized above alliance and bloodline. You are my mate by every law of this kingdom. What happens after that?" I paused. "What happens after that is yours to decide. I will not take that from you." She was quiet for a moment, turning the clay cup in her hands. "You followed your wolf into a killing storm," she said. "Yes." "On a mountain pass at night in a whiteout." "Yes." That's not very sensible behavior for a king. No, I said, it isn't. And now you're sitting in my linta telling me that the mark on my shoulder is real, and the law recognizes it, and the decision is mine. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment with that expression. I was still learning, serious and direct, and not performing anything. I think, she said slowly, that you might be more interesting than you look. Which was not the response I had expected. I realized, either fear or performance, either a woman frightened by the weight of what was being offered, or a woman calculating what to do with it. What I got instead was a woman who has spent 6 years making herself a life on a mountain ridge through careful observation and honest assessment, applying those same habits to me and arriving at an opinion. I've been told I'm difficult, I offered. I live alone on a mountain, she said. I find difficult people restful. This time she almost smiled. I felt it like a change in air pressure. I got to my feet. Outside, the light was fully up, cold and clean, the ridge washed clear by the night's storm. Somewhere below us on the eastern path I could hear, very faintly, the sound of boots on packed snow. My patrol, I calculated, which meant Davin had gotten worried at first light and come looking for me, which meant we were about to have company. My patrol is coming, I said. She stood too, setting down the cup. She had pulled the wool back up over the mark, but she knew it was there. I could tell by the way she held her shoulder, a new awareness in it. Should I be concerned? She asked, not afraid, asking a practical question. No, I said, you should let me do the talking. They came up the ridge path 4 minutes later, Davin in front, a senior tracker beside him, 2 guards behind. They stopped when they saw me. Then they saw Greyhorn, lying in the linta entrance with his bandaged foreleg extended. Then they saw Lyra, standing beside me in her undyed wool with her herbalist-stained hands. No mark visible, no rank insignia, nothing that would tell a patrol anything except that she was a woman with no obvious credentials on a mountain ridge. I watched the calculations run across Davin's face. He was trying to understand the scene, and doing reasonably well given the information available to him. My lord, he said carefully, you're well. Entirely, I said. Greyhorn took an injury coming up the ridge last night. He found shelter here. I looked at Lyra. This is the woman who treated his wound and kept him alive through the rockfall. Davin looked at Greyhorn. He looked at the lean-to, at the evidence of the rockfall damage on the roof, at the bandaging work visible on Greyhorn's foreleg. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has been my lieutenant for 7 years and knows that the simplest explanation is usually the true one, and that whatever I'm about to say next is going to require him to adjust his understanding of the morning. Her name is Lyra, I said. She lives on this ridge. She has kept herself on this border for 6 years, and she knows the Thornwall passes better than our own surveyors. I paused. She is also my fated mate. The silence on the ridge lasted approximately 4 seconds, which is a long time. Davin's expression went through several stages. The tracker made a small sound. One of the 2 guards looked at the other. Lyra beside me said nothing. She was watching the patrol with the careful attention of someone who is taking in new information about a situation she has not fully mapped yet, and I realized with a clarity that the bond confirmed that she was not afraid of them. She was assessing them. The way she assessed everything, honestly, directly, without performance. The mark is visible, I said, if you need to see it. Davin shook his head slowly. I don't know, my lord, I believe you. Good, I said. Then let's get Greyhorn down to the way station before that shoulder stiffens. Lyra, I turned to her. Your shelter will need repairs. I'll send men. I don't need. The roof buckled, I said. The door frame cracked. It's a matter of structural safety, not charity. I looked at her directly. Let me. She held my gaze for a moment, then she nodded, once precise the way she did everything. We brought Greyhorn down the ridge in stages slowly, with Lyra walking beside him and occasionally checking the bandaging. My patrol had the good sense to let the situation establish itself without commentary. Davin, to his considerable credit, fell in behind me and said nothing except what was militarily relevant, which is why he has been my lieutenant for 7 years. Halfway down the path, where the ridge widened and you could see the full sweep of the Varenmoor Valley below, the forest dark with frost, the stone holds just visible in the morning light, the passes behind us now clean and still, Lyra stopped. She stood at the edge of the path and looked at the valley for a long moment. I stopped beside her. I didn't know it was this big, she said. She said it quietly, not to me specifically, just to the air. I could see the valley from the ridge, but I didn't. She stopped. It's your kingdom too, I said. By law, by the bond. She looked at me. I'm aware that you didn't choose it, I said. I'm aware that you built what you have here on your own terms and you didn't ask for any of this. The bond doesn't ask for permission. But what you do with it, I stopped. I have not spent 11 years in diplomacy. I have spent 11 years in warfare and governance, and the vocabulary of one does not translate directly to the other. What you do with it, I said again, is yours. She was quiet for a long moment. The valley spread below us in the cold morning light, vast and still. You followed your wolf into a storm, she said, at night, on the Thornwall Ridge. I told you. No, she said. I'm not criticizing, I'm observing. She looked at me again, and this time the expression I was still learning was clearer. Not the almost smile, not the assessment, but something more settled, more considered. I healed animals because it was the right thing to do. I covered your wolf because he was hurt and couldn't run, and leaving him wasn't an option. That's all I know how to be. Someone who doesn't leave when it costs something. I know, I said. I watched you. Then you know what you're getting. I do, I said. I find it suits me. She almost laughed then. Not quite, it was the edge of a laugh, the shape of one, but warm, and it was the first unguarded thing she'd shown me, and it changed the whole quality of the morning. All right, she said, not the word of someone overwhelmed or performing capitulation. The word of a woman who has assessed a situation honestly and arrived at a decision. All right, I'll need to bring things down from the lean-to. Plants and preparations I can't leave, they'll freeze without the fire. We can go back for them today, I said, or I can send. I'll go back, she said. I know where everything is. Of course she would, I was already learning. We continued down the ridge, the patrol spreading out in the practical way of soldiers who have accepted a new reality and are now making the logistical calculations it requires. Davin had started running through, I could tell by his expression, the administrative implications of his king arriving at the way station with a fated mate from the border ridge. He was a thorough man. It was going to be a long list. Greyhorn walked steadily at Lyra's left side for the entire descent, which is the side I usually walk on. I noticed. I said nothing. He is a wolf of strong opinions, and I have learned not to argue with him. The way station was warm and stocked, and when we arrived the men who had sheltered there overnight stood quickly at my entrance. Then they saw Greyhorn, with his bandaged foreleg, and Lyra walking beside him, and the expressions shifted, curiosity, reassessment, the particular recalibration of soldiers who are good at reading situations. I brought Lyra to the fire, and one of the men brought broth, because they were sensible people and she had been on a cold ridge all night. She took it without ceremony and drank it and said thank you in the direct way she said everything, and I watched my men revise their impression of her in real time. The shoulder, one of the older soldiers said quietly, Farron, a border veteran who had been with my father before he was with me. He was looking at the neckline of Lyra's wool, where the mark was partially visible in the lean-to's warmth. His voice was not hostile. It was careful and certain. That's a fated bond mark. Yes, I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at Lyra with the expression of a man who has served in border, holds his whole life, and knows what it costs to be on the ridge alone, and what it means to hold ground without support. She treated Greyhorn, Davin said quietly, through the night in the rockfall. Farron looked at the wolf, at the bandaging, at the clean field work of it. He was an experienced enough soldier to know good treatment when he saw it. He straightened. It was not quite a bow, more the specific posture of a border veteran acknowledging something real. "Well done," he said to Lyra, simple, direct, the highest compliment a man like Farron offers. She looked at him steadily. "He's a good wolf," she said. "He made it easy." That was the moment, I think, when the men in the way station decided who she was. Not the mark, not my word, though both mattered. The way she deflected the credit to the wolf, and the way she said it, flat and certain, as if it were simply true. You learn things about a person in how they handle being thanked. She handled it the way she handled everything, honestly, without decoration. We stayed at the way station through the mid-morning while Greyhorn rested, and the passes were checked. Lyra went back up to the Linta with 2 of my men to retrieve her plants and preparations. She was precise about which ones, leaving nothing behind that she said would survive the cold, but taking everything she called essential, and she moved through the inventory with the efficiency of someone who has packed and unpacked her life before. I watched from the way station door. She filled 2 large packs and came back down without complaint about the weight. "What happens now?" she said, when the patrol had assembled to begin the main descent. "We take Greyhorn to the holds," I said. "My surgeon will want to look at the shoulder in better light. Then," I paused, "whatever you want to happen." "You keep saying that," she said. "The choice is yours, what you want. As if you're waiting for me to pick a direction." "I am," I said. "Why?" "Because you built what you have here on your own," I said. "Because the bond didn't ask your permission, and neither did I because—" I stopped. The vocabulary of governance still wasn't right for this. "Because it matters," I said. "What you want to do with it, it matters to me." She was quiet for a moment. Both packs settled at her feet, her breath visible in the cold air. "I want to see it," she said finally. "The valley, the holds, I want to understand what this is." She looked at me. "And then I want to go back to the ridge, at least some of the time. My plants don't gather themselves." "The ridge is in Varanmore," I said. "It's yours to move on as you please." "Even as?" "Especially as," I said. Something settled in her expression. The same quality as when she'd said all right on the path above the valley, a decision made without ceremony, the way she did everything. "Then I'd like to see it," she said, "the kingdom." We descended together. The news reached the holds before we did, the way news always does through the patrol channels, faster than feet. By the time we came through the main approach, the outer courtyard had people in it who were not there on ordinary descents, word having moved through the hold in the 2 hours it took us to come down from the ridge. My council, senior pack members. People who had been waiting for this particular development for 11 years, and had, based on their expressions, not expected it to arrive looking like this. Lyra walked beside me and Greyhorn and did not change her pace for any of it. She looked at the holds the way she'd looked at the valley, with careful, honest attention, taking in information. She looked at the people the way she'd looked at my patrol in the way station, assessing direct, not performing anything. She had 2 packs of plant materials over her shoulder, and herbalist-stained hands and no mark visible above her wool, and she walked through my courtyard as if she had taken stock of her situation and found it manageable. My counselor Merritt stepped forward. She was a careful woman, politically sophisticated, and she wore the expression of someone who has a great deal to say and is choosing the right moment for it. "My lord," she said, her eyes went to Lyra, then back to me. "We heard." "You heard correctly," I said. "Her name is Lyra. She kept Greyhorn alive through last night and the rockfall both. She is my fated mate." I paused. "The bond is marked and real. We'll discuss the formal recognition in session this afternoon." Merritt opened her mouth. "This afternoon," I said. It was the voice I use when I have made a decision, and the discussion is about timing rather than substance. She closed her mouth. She was good at her job, she knew the difference. Lyra beside me said nothing. She watched Merritt with the same careful attention she'd turned on everything else, and when Merritt's gaze came back to her, assessing her in return, I saw it, the political calculation running behind careful eyes. She met it evenly, without either deference or challenge. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Merritt did something I have seen her do perhaps 4 times in the years she has served on my council. She inclined her head. Not a bow, something more considered than that. An acknowledgement of something she'd identified and decided was real. "Welcome to the Holds," she said to Lyra. "Thank you," Lyra said, direct, no excess. "I expect I have a great deal to learn." "Yes," Merritt said. And then, which surprised me, "as do we." The formal session that afternoon was, by the standards of my council meetings, brief. I presented the bond. I showed them the marked documentation. The bond had been witnessed by members of my patrol, and the matching mark on my shoulder had been confirmed by the Hold surgeon by noon, which removed the question of legitimacy before anyone could raise it. The bond law of Varanmore is not ambiguous. A fated bond is recognized above alliance and bloodline claims. There was no procedural argument to be made. There were opinions. I had expected opinions. My council is good at its job, which means it is good at identifying complications, and the complications here were real: a mate with no pack standing, no alliance value, no political network from the border ridge, with no preparation for the ceremonial and administrative weight of being a Warden King's recognized mate. These were real concerns. I let them be stated. Then I said, "She kept Greyhorn alive in a killing storm and a rockfall. She covered him with her own body before she knew who he belonged to. She knows the Thornwall passes better than our survey teams. The bond is real and it is marked and the law is clear. We will proceed." There were no further objections. What happened after was not simple, because nothing about governing a mountain kingdom is simple. Lyra learned the Holds the way she'd learned the Ridge, carefully, through observation, asking precise questions and remembering the answers. She was not comfortable in the ceremonial aspects. She said so plainly, and we adjusted what could be adjusted without compromising what couldn't. She went back to the Ridge twice in the first month. She brought preparations down that my Hold surgeon said were more effective than anything he'd sourced from the valley markets. She also, quietly and without announcement, began documenting the high-pass ice shelf patterns she'd spent 6 years observing, and handed the documentation to my surveyors with a note that listed the conditions under which each shelf was likely to destabilize. My survey chief came to me looking slightly dazed. He said it was the most comprehensive single account of the Thornwall Ridge conditions he had ever seen. He said it would take his team 3 years to verify what she'd described. "She's been up there for 6 years," I told him. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "I see that now." Greyhorn recovered fully. He spent the first 2 weeks of his recovery in the quarters that had been given to Lyra, which were not, to my council's careful observation, my quarters, because she had been direct about that too. There were things to understand first, trust to build, and she was not a woman who moved faster than the situation warranted. I did not argue with this. I am difficult, but I am not foolish. The wolf's preference was noted by everyone, and commented on by no one within my hearing. 3 months after the storm, on a clear morning when the Thornwall was white against a hard blue sky, I found her at the ridge overlook above the Holds, the high point where you can see the full extent of Varanmore in all directions, every pass, every valley, the forest below and the ice above. She had come up before dawn, she said, because she had wanted to see the whole of it in the morning light. She had her herbalist's pack with her. She had been gathering on the way up. I sat beside her on the granite, and we looked at the kingdom. "The Northwest Pass," she said, pointing. The ice shelf there will go in the next hard wind. I should write that up for the surveyors." "You should," I said. She looked at the full sweep of it for a while. The bond between us was easy now, settled, the burning urgency of the first night replaced by something steadier, the particular warmth of a fire that has been burning long enough to be trusted. "I used to look at this from up there," she said, tilting her head toward the ridge above us. 6 years of looking at it from the wrong side." "You were watching it." "I was watching it," she agreed. "I just didn't know what I was watching." She had named 37 passes, 14 ice shelves, and 4 previously uncharted ridgelines in her documentation. She had, without anything as formal as a decision, become the person my border commanders consulted when they needed to know what the mountain was likely to do next. She had learned to hold ceremonial requirements with the thoroughness of someone determined to understand the system she was operating in, even the parts she found unnecessary. She had told me twice that she found the council meetings long, and I had agreed, and she had attended every one. She was not what my council had imagined a Warden King's mate would be. She was considerably more than that, but in a direction they hadn't thought to look. I looked at her profile against the winter sky, the specific quality of her attention when she was thinking, the herbalist's hands relaxed on her knees, the mark just visible at her collar where the wool had shifted in the wind. "Lyra," I said. She looked at me. "The kingdom is yours," I said, "as much mine as yours by law and by bond. I want you to know that I mean it in practice, not only in declaration." She held my gaze for a moment. "I know," she said. "I've been watching how you mean things." "And you mean them," she said, simply. The wind came up from the valley, cold and clean, carrying the smell of pine and ice, the smell of the mountain, which is the smell of this kingdom, which is the smell that means home to both of us, though we came to it by different roads. "I owe you something," I said. "You don't," she said. "Greyhorn's life," I said, "which is not a small debt." She was quiet for a moment. "He found his way to me," she said. "I think that's the part that matters. He already knew." "He did," I said. "He has better judgment than I do." "Debatable," she said, and now she was genuinely smiling, the full version of it, which I had been learning for 3 months and still found it stopped whatever I was about to say next. I did not argue the point. Below us, Varanmore spread in every direction, the kingdom I had held by its teeth for 11 years, the passes I had defended, the valleys that slept because people like us held the high ground. It was the same kingdom it had been the morning before the storm, and it was not the same at all. She had named the Northwest Pass for the survey maps. She had written it in her documentation in the same direct hand she used for everything. The Lyra approach, she'd called it, with the specificity of a woman marking a route for someone who comes after. I had looked at the name on the map and said nothing about it, because there was nothing to say that the name didn't already say. The wind shifted, coming now from the northwest, from the Thornwall Ridge and the lean-to above it and the storm we'd been in together, and the rockfall she'd sheltered a wolf through without counting the cost. "I am the Warden King of Varanmore. I have held this kingdom for 11 years. I have not lost a pass." What I found in the storm was not a loss. It was the thing I had been holding the mountain for, without knowing it. The reason the ache had always pulled northwest, toward the ridge, toward the woman who lived on it and knew it better than anyone, and had never once left an injured creature to fend for itself in the cold. She was watching the Northwest Pass in the morning light, noting something she'd want to write down later, already thinking about the survey documentation, already working. I would not have her any other way.